Hey everybody, this is Joseph S. Samaniego. I'm the author of the Carolingian Age series, a fantasy book series, and I am a cartographer for a lot of fantasy maps and a historian. And I have been working on the uh, history-inspired fantasy series. And we've talked about maps, we talked a lot about castles, especially Norman style and Anglo-Saxon style castles and fortifications. Now I want to talk on something a little bit different, and I want to talking about a kind of a weighty subject, something that seems to be controversial, but really shouldn't be from a common sense point of view, and that is armor. And specifically, we're going to start off right out the gate with female armor and what it is as far as functionality and why the traditional fantasy style female armor sucks and really should not. It should just die a horrific death. So let's get to that. So if you've ever wondered about armor, where armor comes from, armor in fantasy, and the point of views of armor, there's a lot of videos about it, but here's mine, and away we go. Now, I'll say I've always been a fan of Robert Howard's work. A big fan of Conan. That's kind of what got me started. I was born in the really early 80s, so seeing Conan on screen was great. Conan the Barbarian with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Right after that comes Red Sonja. Great. I love the film. And yeah, so as an adolescent kid, growing up, it just became common sense, not common sense, but commonplace to see fantasy armor look certain ways. What then I started looking at, especially as I started writing and started learning history, was how much of it did not make sense and how much of it was really just terrible in the grand scheme of things. And there's a lot of arguments here and there, but let's just look at the functionality of it. And to start off, let's talk about Red Sonja, and because that's the number one. So here's the traditional Red Sonja. You have a warrior woman who is looking like she's probably not going into battle. There's no real protection for her abdomen, her legs, and that is very important. That is actually really a crucial thing, because if you cut off someone's legs, they're pretty much done. It's with the exception of, oh yeah, tis but a scratch, yes, but no, you cut off someone's legs, they're done. You cut off their arms, they're done. So there's a lot of vulnerabilities here, just in general, not even just looking at the concept of what this armor is. But the worst part of it for me is mostly the fact that there was nothing for her legs, nothing for her arms, and nothing for her abdomen. These are very vulnerable areas in armor. There is a key functionality for those areas. Up until recent years, I've already said, if you cut someone's legs, they're done. You cut their hamstring, there's arteries in the legs that fencers were trained to go for. They were trained to attack, especially in the back of the thigh. If they cut that, not only is your movement then gone and you're extremely hampered, but it goes deeper than that you are actually now starting to bleed to death. So that is key. Obviously, in your arms, there's arteries as well. But in your abdomen, up until really maybe the last 100 years, a wound in your abdomen was almost certain death. It was really the same premise as getting an artery, because if your stomach was punctured, all that acid would then get into your other organ. It was internal. There was a lot of internal injuries that came with that. You always see the cowboy movies with the guy's gut shot. He say, oh, gut shot means you ain't gonna make it. This is same basic premise here. So I'm not even talking about looks. Let's just talk about functionality. It's just not functional. Yes, it's protecting certain areas. Like we can say, hey, it's protecting our arms, protecting our shoulders, sure, but it's just not functional. It really isn't. So what would then be a more functional armor? And I really think to answer that question, we really need to look at the components and the style of armor in a brief sense here. I mean, let's be honest. The armor itself had a kind of a sort of a plate, small plate, chainmail quality to it. I think it has been listed as a type of chain. So and that's important because that was a very, very common type of armor. But let's look at that a little bit more real quick. What you see here is a chain shirt, a chainmail shirt. Now this is a loose chain, as you can see, but the functionality behind the chainmail, and this is a modern interpretation that is available for cosplayers and LARPers to buy and reenactors. But the whole premise behind this shirt, this chainmail shirt, really was the sense of you're going to protect yourself. You're going to protect yourself from slices. From the chain would not stop a barb or a spear point or even a sword point. Some sword points, especially as the sword points got finer. When you look at fencing and rapiers and things like that, came in the Renaissance. But as you can see, there are certain vulnerabilities, certain holes and gaps. But for a slice with a sword, it was actually pretty effective against. So this is really what you would consider to be the chain, and this was pretty effective, and it was actually not a bad piece of equipment to have. Would it be heavy? Sure, and you would have to have something underneath it, and that is really another important aspect of this, something that a lot of people talk about. Let's see that. Often underneath the chain, you would have the padded cloth or gambeson. And this, in a sense, is the kind of the bread and butter of armor that most people would have had in the Dark Ages, Middle Ages. And we'll get into a little bit earlier than that in a second too, because this is going to play into some of my fantasy works. So one of the things that you have here is a very heavy plate, oh, not plate, excuse me, padded cloth. And this wouldn't necessarily protect against all the points and everything that the chainmail, but when you add it on top of the chainmail, you're giving yourself extra protection, which is key. You're giving yourself an extra bit of help that you wouldn't necessarily have. And a lot of this was what people could afford anyway. They couldn't afford the intricacy of a chainmail. The chainmail being so tedious to create and just meticulous, time consuming, and it had to be fitted. It had to be fitted to size. This was something that was a little bit more available for the common man, the common soldier, and it still offered protection. It still was a pretty good protective piece of equipment that you would commonly see. And when you add this onto chainmail, you just get at doubling up that protection. Now, if we're looking at things that you'll see in my books, a lot of what you're going to see is the Anglo-Saxon style of what we would consider to be the Dark Ages now, prior to the Norman invasion, and then even into the Norman invasion, you saw it as well. And this is actually pretty good depiction of this battle reenactment. And what we have is what looks to be Norse or perhaps even Anglo-Saxons with others that might be Norman or Anglo-Saxon here. You have the chainmail shirts that most of them, his is more of a shirt, his is more of a kind of a gown in a sense that went down to the right above the knee, lower thighs. His is more waist level. And then here, the larger shields with multiple layers of clothes, kind of mimicking the padded, but then the helmets. These are nasal helms. They have the conical shape, which is good for deflecting blows to the head. But then it also has the nasal guard here, which is about, comes down mostly to the mouth usually, but at least covers your nose and helps to keep you from having a broken nose. So definitely very helpful there. But this would be what you would look at, and this is what you can kind of imagine for my fantasy books and a lot of other fantasy books that you have come across, especially with a lot of the Anglo-Saxon Norman themes. So there's another style of armor, which is it's a kind of a plated style, and as you can see here, lamellar, if I'm pronouncing that right. I'm very bad at pronunciations. I'm a historian that's terrible at pronunciations. I don't know why. There's actually a pretty good little discussion going on that's about pronunciations in fantasy and other literature, and I will always attempt. I will never change the name. I will always attempt, and that's my attempt. But this style of armor was also very intricate to make, but it was less expensive than other styles. And as you can see, it is basically on leather, as what this looks like. You would have plates of metal, iron, perhaps steel at some point, bronze, even bone there's some bone, wood, different materials sewn on or riveted on, depending on how it was done. This looks to be more or less sewn with probably leather, and it would protect you. This would protect you from points a lot better than chain would. Now he's wearing a chain shirt underneath, which is just very common because this provides protection along his side, along his arms. But to penetrate this, you would have to get in between these little slats, and that was not very easy to do. And this is a very functional armor. It allowed for a lot more range of movement than plate did and other styles of armor. As you know, you see in the particular styles, especially with the Greek style, it is a plate, a chest plate that is from here to here, just chest, and it's just one thing. And your range of movement is very, it's hard to see me in this little screen, but your range of movement is very difficult. Here you have a whole lot more range of movement, added protection to the chain, which also gives you range of movement. So it's a very popular piece. So good, in fact, that we actually find it in multiple cultures. This is a modern recreation of what could have been seen in Japan. We do know in feudal Japan they used a similar style of armor construction for the armor of samurai and different retainers for the samurai warriors that there were. They used a very similar style with multiple hundreds, if not thousands, of plates sewn on to leather or wood and or even just heavy cloth and then worn into battle. That was very common. So that armor is so great. And you got chain, you got the lamellar, you got all kinds of great armor. Gambeson, why wasn't it worn by women? Well, okay. Or why don't fantasy show women? We do know women who fought. That's coming up in a few minutes. It is an awesome story, and I love it. It's one of my most favorite. It has inspired several of my characters, and I love it. But the question here is, why isn't it shown more in fantasy? Well, why can't women wear that type of armor? Of course they can. Women can do whatever the hell they want to do. Just get that through your head. Okay? Women can do whatever the hell they want to do. Plain and simple. So, but women wearing armor. Ta-da! Right there. That is a modern depiction of and actually multiple styles of armor. You got the gambeson, you have the lamellar armor, you have plate, and obviously a plate helm, kind of a style of a cruciform sugarloaf helm, not quite the sugarloaf helm, but something you would have seen in the Crusader time period. So while this armor, it does look like a modern recreationist of multiple styles put together from different time periods, although the gambeson would have probably still been in use to this extent, to a certain extent. This is very practical, functional armor. Arms are protected. Sure, we could have some gauntlets here or something here, a little bit more protection. That would probably be coming next. Legs are protected. Midsection is protected. Shoulders are protected. Head is protected. That's one thing I did not mention with the Red Sonja. The head wasn't protected. And look, I'm gonna be honest with you. Conan's armor was not there either. I mean, the guy was wearing a loincloth, running around, and his muscles protected him. I guess I don't know. Big ass sword that he had protected him. I guess. Very few times was he ever wearing a helmet either. Great helm, right here. That is a great helm. A full body armor. This is very protective. This is very functional. And we see this very often in fantasy, but we don't remember it. Why? Well, I do. We don't, a lot of people don't remember it. Why? Because it's not as sexy. It's not as fantasy. Come on. The whole idea of fantasy, you say, yeah, I want to write fantasy. Let us remember there is fantasy and then there is fantasy. So before I go off on some tangents on that, let's see some fantasy examples of real cool functional armor. Yes, I'm starting with some dudes. Why? Because it's about armor. And yeah, the subcontext was about female armor, but there's also male armor in here too. And this is it. We have plate, plate, leather, chain. Now that being this is male. This is what's common. This is what we expect from armor in males. Should we expect what we expect from everybody, but this is definitely what we expect from males. So hey, it is what it is, right? But what about the female armor? There's a lot of great female armors as well. And let's get into a little bit of that. So first off, let me show you one of the greatest video game series of all time. Uh, RPG came out in the mid 90s. I think 96 was the 95, 96 was the first one. Should we get in? Should code in, however you want to pronounce it. This was from number 3. This is Chris Lightfellow. She is one of the 3 protagonists, 3 main protagonists. If you've ever played that game, there's 3 right there. 3 main protagonists. If you ever played that game, there's actually, I would say, 3.5 or 3 3/4 protagonists, because you have Godot, Hugo, Chris, 3 main ones. Then you have Thomas, and then you can play as a dog for a little bit, which is kind of fun. So if you ever play the game, you know what I'm talking about. But look, this is her armor set. Armor, casual. Now it's still armor because you can still kind of almost get an idea that this is probably somewhat padded. Still has her glove. This is what I was talking about with the other armor set that would want some hand protection, but you got a plate set. And the plate is really, it's concave at certain points, which would allow for glancing of the blows. Now, when I say glancing of the blows, when you're striking at somebody and you hit a certain way, if you have a glance, the blade is going to glance off, such as that. That's why when you had the conical helms and you had a strike here with a sword, it would glance off. So not as much protection on the legs, but but this is a very great way. This is armor. This is functional armor. It's great to see. And this was from a video game this game came out in, let's see, I got married in 92. This game came out around 90, I mean, not 92, sorry, 2002. This game came out in around 2003. So, because I remember seeing it on my honeymoon or so, somewhere around that time period. Now, how could I do a video about female armor without Cassandra? Dragon Age 2 at certain points, Dragon Age Inquisition, and let's hope the next one that they're working on. But come on, she is a battle-hardened woman. If you've ever seen I can't remember what the name of the film. There actually is an anime that focuses on her early days as a warrior. She is a hardened warrior. Now, obviously, again, it's leather, so the leg protections isn't quite there. You can customize her armor though, just like your character, just like other characters. So it's pretty cool. But this is female armor, and it's still sleek. It is still really cool. So the whole rule of however it looks, screw you. Is it functional? No. I'm probably gonna get a lot of shit for that too, aren't I? So I'd like to take it back to some real world examples again. And this is Tomei Gozen. This is an artist rendition of her. And she was basically a female samurai. Now, it wasn't actually truly a samurai, but she was from that class. And she was a warrior. Now, this is what I was talking about with the armor earlier, the lamellate armor in the Asian Japanese style. Very intricately designed. But she was a famous warrior herself, and she is one of many, really, in Japanese history. If you ever get a chance to read up on it, she was very powerful in her own right, and songs were sung, everything was done about it. Fantasies were created for her based on her deeds. This is just a real world example of how strong female warriors were with armor that was armor. It was not just female armor. It's not just male armor. It's armor. Okay, so that's that. Now let's look at one. I did say that there was going to be one that was very near and dear to my heart, and it's one that I think that a lot of people will know. And there's there's been a series recently with her in it. But Catherine of Aragon, who was famously the first wife of Henry VIII, she had her armor set as well. Now, what's famous about hers is, so she was not a type of queen or what have you that was wanted to just stay out of the way of her husband. She was on par in her own right with her husband. You know, here's the king, here's the queen, we rule together. And in the early years of Henry VIII, he welcomed that because he was doing other things himself. He was in France a lot, pressing his claims. Well, and that's where this one particular story comes up. And it's actually seen in the TV series, The Spanish Princess. This is not fantasy. This is actually historical. So this is where we get back to my historical roots. At the Battle of Flodden, Catherine of Aragon, Queen of England, the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain, rode into battle in her own armor. Now, she didn't partake in any fighting of the battle, but she led her troops on the battlefield and famously sent back the bloody coat of the King of Scotland, which was James IV at the time, to her husband, to kind of show, hey, this is what I did. The coolest thing here, and it's shown in that particular series, is that not only did she ride with her men and ride in armor and influence her men, and we see this with with Kate Blanchett's Elizabeth, but here Catherine did it about 7-8 months pregnant. She was heavily pregnant at the time. That in itself. So let us see how the Spanish princess did with that particular armor. And boom, there you go. So you can see the Tudor rose behind her. But here she is in armor, chain, pregnant, legs are protected, arms are fully protected, body is fully protected, torso is protected, neck is protected. Another very important part. There's really no part of your body you want to get hit in a battle. I mean, let's just be honest. If you've ever been in a fight, no matter, or you just played contact sports, I played rugby at points in my life, you get hit, you're going to hurt at some point, whether it's then or whether it's later, you're going to hurt. But here, she is protected. The only thing that's not protected is her head. And a lot of times, leaders would do that up until the point of battle. Now, obviously, she's not going into the battle to fight. There's a very famous story that they would do that to allow for their men to see them, to know who they were. You didn't need protection amongst your own men necessarily, ideally. We do know stories, but you wouldn't do it. You would leave your head exposed just enough so people would know who you were. We have the story of William the Conqueror falling in battle and then getting up and seeing his men leave. So he takes off his helmet to show his face and say, hey, I'm still here. Follow me and fight with me. So we don't see her helmet here. We kind of have to assume she's probably going to have something not quite like the kettle helms here. These are what they call kettle helms. But she would probably have something that's just like a chalet or something that would cover her head and just be not really conical, but more rounded, and then leave her face open. So her horse is even protected. Come on, we got to protect the horse. So we protect the horses, but we don't protect the women. I mean, come on. So here we have a great, just amazing example of historical armor. And it almost looks very similar to her husband's ceremonial armor as well. One thing that I do like, and I don't know if this was part of it, but the portcullis here was actually a symbol of her husband's father's family. It was or his mother's family, I can't remember. Well, basically from his ancestry. So was that used for that? I don't know. But there you have it. Historical examples of armor, male and female, with why female armor in things like Red Sonja and all these things where you see bikini style armor, especially with like Skyrim mods or other game mods, just don't work. And I think most people know that. But really, what I would love to do is try to let's get away from that. When you read my books and you hear about the armor, I'm describing the armor as best I can, but I'm also describing armor that is, 100% functional above looks. And that has to be the case because we're talking about people going into battle and fighting and limbs being hacked at and shot with arrows. There's that famous story of the plane having the air having bullet holes and all these planes coming back, and they're saying, well, we gotta protect this place because all the bullets are there. It's like, well, no, you should protect the places that they don't have bullets, because those are the ones that didn't come back, or so to speak, or I'll probably screw that story up. But anyway, the idea is you're wanting to offer yourself as much protection as possible. We're not in this era where we can just let's just sell books or just sell merchandise, art, whatever. We can't do that. So that has to be kind of forgotten about. Let's just use common sense now with this armor, and that's that armor. Now that is very Dark Ages, what we consider Dark Ages. Not really a term we really try to use anymore, but that's the Anglo-Saxon time period, Viking Age, early Norman style armors that you would see commonly, and in feudal Japan, as I showed you a couple others. The armor then starts getting a little bit different as we get into the Crusader period, and things do start changing. And I am going to go into that because now that we've got this whole male female thing out, again, let's stop. It's not female armor. It's not male armor. It is armor. It is armor to protect us, protect human beings, elves, dwarves, whatever you have, and I mean dwarves in the fantasy sense. It is armor to protect these mortal beings in fantasy world, just like it was armor to protect the human beings in our real world. So let's get away from labeling it female or male and just call it what it is. It is armor. So we're going to go into more next time about armor. We'll talk about kind of the Crusader style armor that we see with knights, and going into the kind of the 15th century style of armor that became more common with plate, and go from there. So thank you. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Put your comments down below if you want to hear other talks, if you have any opinions, if you want to call me a jerk for calling out jerks for, I didn't really call out any jerks, but if you want to call me a jerk for crapping on your ideas about armor, sorry, just sorry, whatever. I really don't give a shit. And I do cuss a lot, so I'm trying not to on these videos. But yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe if you made it this far. Please do. And I want to thank my patrons at Patreon. The link's into there. I offer maps. So I'm a cartographer as well, mostly fantasy. So let's make some maps. And thank you to my patrons. My newest patron, Tiffany Lewis, who is a fantastic author herself, crime author. If you like crime fiction, check her out. And but until then, thank you.